beautiful soul. So how have you been? It's been a while. um, welcome back to my channel, Breathe and Balance. My name is Chathuri. For those of you who are new to my channel, in this channel we talk about many things, mystical, magical, and metaphysical, for the purpose of regaining balance in all aspects of our lives. And today I'm going to talk about a topic that may not be very popular, but I love to delve into these different aspects of life that are not often spoken about or explored, right? Because there are so many hidden gems and insights that helps in our journeys of transformation and awakening, to expand our consciousness, um, which is the goal of seekers like us, right? And this channel is for those of you who are sincerely on the path to liberation. So today, I want to talk about performance. Right? So, what do I mean by performance? So, as you may all already be aware, to at least some extent, life is a performance, right? I mean, even Shakespeare said in one of his plays, right? Life is a stage and everybody's performing, something to that extent. And we are all actors, right? And we perform various roles, whether it be as parents or children, partners, siblings, friends, colleagues, leaders, members of society, whatever the role may be. And even as healers, we are all healers in some capacity. So, and in a previous episode, I was talking about the different parts. We have so many, like hundreds of different parts, which each of them are performing a particular role and a function in our lives to serve a particular purpose, right, in our growth and evolution. So, yeah, I mean, it's an inherent part of life, I would say. This performance, it's embedded into human life and living. But having said that, I want to go into an aspect of performance that separates us from our authentic self, right? So that's the aspect of performance I want to focus on, not really the overarching or overall performance in the story of life as we live in this human incarnation, in this physical reality, because that we might not be able to escape. Because there are lessons involved. Here today, what I want to talk about is how we learn to forget our true nature, the essence of who we truly are as a soul and as a being, as we become programmed or conditioned into becoming a self that is created to fit in, to belong, to please, right? So I hope you are now getting a sense of the difference between these two performances that I'm talking about. So as we are all aware since the day we are born, we are programmed, right? I call social conditioning in sociology and psychology. So we are taught by our parents, by schools, and generally society, social media, whatever it is, we are constantly being influenced and taught how to be and behave. What is right and what is wrong, all these different judgments and belief systems and expectations, stereotypes, ideas, all these things start pouring into us and we swallow it wholesale without any questioning, especially as children, because we don't have the cognition to filter out everything. We just absorb and we just learn by observing our environment and emulating the adults in our lives to whom we are attached, right? So that's how we learn. Very unconsciously, I would say it's a rather unconscious process, but a very powerful one, right? So as I keep sharing this, in my videos, especially I spoke about this in the one on the shadow self, right? How when like we have this craving to be loved and accepted and to belong. And underlying that, there is that need to survive. It's all about survival and safety at the core of it, right? And of course, that need to be loved. So as a result of this need, in order to fulfill that need, we easily become susceptible to influence and we adapt certain behaviors that may not even be a part of us, or who we truly are. And it's, that might even go contrary to our own needs, but we adapt, we conform, and we comply in order to be accepted because of our fear of rejection. Our ego mind does not want us to be rejected. It really wants us to belong so that we are safe and we survive. So the moment, let's say, we express something from our authentic self, let's say a simple need, and we express our truth of the moment, and somebody gets angry or criticizes or tells us, oh, you shouldn't be saying or doing that, they shut us down or they reject us in some way, shape, or form. And immediately the ego adapts. It gets the message, oh, this particular behavior is making me rejected. So I need to suppress that. I should not be saying or doing this. And that's when we start, unconsciously, of course, most of the time, to repress, right? And we start pleasing, people, especially adults, because we realize, we learn that our survival and safety are dependent on pleasing them or agreeing to what they say in compliance and conformity. Okay? And this can happen in so many different ways and very subtle ways as well. And it's not that, most of the time anybody is trying to harm us. I mean, they are just doing, adults, they do what they have learned, as parents, they want the best for their children oftentimes, and they think they are doing the right thing. And, it passes down the generations, and that's the collective consciousness, That's why we call it a social conditioning process. So what ultimately then happens is we, as we learn to people please, now in the extreme, it can become a trauma response as well, which is referred to as a fawning, Then, it becomes, like a behavioral pattern whereby you become a people pleaser and learn to deprioritize yourself and not listen to your own needs, and which can lead to codependence and so many other, um, problematic situations and relational issues and mental health conditions and so on and so forth. That's at the extreme. But even generally, most of us learn in some way or shape to adapt by compromising or even sacrificing our own selves, own needs and emotions and values and, who we truly are, basically our own truth. So in the process, what happens is, in order to belong and first of all, it starts with that, the need for belonging. We succumb to the conditioning or the programming process. And slowly we start to adapt and wear masks, right? And then outside of the family, then once we enter the school or education system, the process becomes even more prominent and reinforced and quite powerful, I would say, because of the rules and the regulations that are, embedded in educational systems. I mean, education itself is kind of like a training ground. It forms our minds, attitudes, values in so many ways, right, in a very structured manner. So sometimes it really closes down our minds instead of helping, the minds expand, especially in conventional education systems. So, and especially those based on examination systems, so in order to pass, and because our economy or the, our later careers and economic and social success, everything is dependent on this education system, right? So we learn to do anything that is required in order to succeed. I mean, pass exams, basically. And unfortunately, there's a lot of performance pressure that has been constructed within our education systems. And recently, one child came to me as a client, a 14-year-old child, very intelligent, mature, and wise for his age, but suffering from anxiety and performance pressure. He literally freezes when it comes to, exams and performing in sports. He's very good at everything. It's the pressure to perform and succeed that creates that trauma response in him. Right. So this is the unfortunate situation that is affecting like multitudes, scores of children and adults. So as children, as we go through the education process, the performance pressure, and, currently, especially even more than during my schooling days, I would say, there's huge pressure not only to perform in examination, but also in extracurricular activities, in social performance, like amongst peers, the peer pressure to behave in a particular way, to dress in a particular way, to look a particular way, the body image, so on and so forth, which this child is actually being really affected by, right? So it's that need to fit in. Because if you don't, then you're excluded, you're rejected, right? And we are unfortunately not taught how to really connect to ourselves and to our scent and stay grounded and stable in our own truth, right? I mean, adults themselves don't know how to do it most of the time, so they are unable to teach children. So the pressure, at home as well as school is to um, do whatever it takes to fit in, because that is considered to be necessary to succeed, right? And everybody wants to succeed and be accepted, right? So then coming out of the school or the education system, whether it's school or a college or whatever, then we go into some kind of a career, and we started working with colleagues and, our bosses and, whoever there might be in our field. And then once again, there is that pressure to perform. Right. So at school, it's to get the best marks and, things like that, or perform in extracurricular activities. But in our careers, our workplaces, it's to perform, like to become the best employee, or, whatever it is, because based on that, you get promotions and then salary raises and, various other perks. And then you're more accepted and considered once again successful. Right. So these are the check boxes that we are taught to tick, as we grow up. We need to be the perfect student, and we need to have the perfect career, and then buy the best vehicle, build the best house, and get the best partner, and so on. Which reminds me, actually, another client of mine who came to me some time back, who's an adult, of course, who's in his 30s. And he was also suffering from a low, very poor self-esteem, and, unable to be assertive. And he was constantly comparing himself to his brother, who was considered to be more successful. So what he wanted was that perfect career, perfect wife, or ideal wife, and that entire package that is considered to be essential in order to be considered successful, because his deepest longing was to be successful. So in order to make his parents, especially his father, proud, because he felt like such a failure, especially in comparison with his brother, who was a high performer, right? And he was really feeling bad about himself, and he was rejecting himself, right? So here's an interesting thing, I'm gonna kind of compare my experience with the 14-year-old child and this 30-year-old client of mine. Because when it comes to the adult, like when he came to me, like I'm a psychospiritual practitioner, I work mainly with the souls of people, right? Not the egos. In fact, I help, my clients to shift from the ego to the soul, because true joy, happiness, wisdom, love, everything is with the soul, not the ego. Ego is very much fear-based and driven by fear, through judgment and, so on and so forth. Anyways, I help people to connect with their souls in order to lead a much more joyous and connected and grounded life, right? So now this adult client was drawn to me through his soul. His soul was whispering that the path that he needs to take is not what his ego mind was telling him. The ego was telling him to go in the conventional pathway, picking the boxes. But his soul wanted something more, and I could clearly see that, right? And he was really eager and committed at the beginning, very enthusiastic, because he could feel it and I could feel it to myself. But unfortunately, he was not really ready, because at some point his ego, the drive, the ego drive and the urges, the impulses were way too strong. It pulled him back, because the ego kept telling him, no, he needs to, do all these things and tick the boxes, which is fine. I mean, this is in no way a judgment towards him, because sometimes we do need to experience these various aspects of life and be ego driven in order to even know the difference between the ego and the soul, because I know I was there at one point in my life. We all are or have been, right? Because you cannot know one polarity without knowing the other, and we need to experience in some way, shape or form, all polarities in order to sort of come into the middle, to the center, to find that center, right? So he has to go through his own journey with the ego for some time, as I realize, before he would be ready to come back to his soul and to be able to listen to his soul. So there he got really stuck with the performance aspects. He really wanted to perform truly. So he was quite triggered by the fact and therefore resistant to the soul's whisper or the urge to slow down and to look at these alternative paths, to go in the other direction. He had not really developed that capacity still, So it didn't really work out well with him at that moment. But I do believe that at some point in future, like, he will slowly come back to his center and start listening more to his soul. But coming to the 14-year-old child now, being a child still, he's still an adolescent. But I can tell you, it's actually a joy to work with him because he sort of gets it even more than an adult and very fast. And actually, at least based on the children that I've worked with, but I think I attract the indigo type, rainbow child type of children. So they are very much more mature and it's easier to work with them. They get it like this, right? There's not much explanation that is necessary and they integrate it pretty fast because they're not as complex and they haven't been programmed to that an extent. So it's kind of easier to break through, some of the belief systems before it becomes concretized. So this child, immediately accessed the inner child who's really carrying certain beautiful resources, who used to be or who is actually his authentic self. So he immediately realized, when he started wanting to perform and giving to the pressure of performance, but that this authentic self is still there, and now he's trying to connect with that, and it's really amazing. So I would, and his preference is to be the authentic self, not to perform. So now we are doing some parts integration work to help him to kind of balance all these different parts so that he can have a more wholesome experience of life, while staying true and connected to his authentic self, but also to belong to the various groups in order to live in society, right? So it's all about balancing. It's not about rejecting any part, but it's all about accepting and sort of making peace with all these different parts and finding that balance, the middle ground, right? So sometimes, that's what I felt like, sometimes it's easier for children to do this work than adults who have become more engulfed or entrapped in these patterns, unfortunately, right? So, and I can think of so many, clients. I mean, I think almost all the clients, and of course, as well as myself and, everybody in my world and the entire world, I feel, subjected to this programming of performance or programming into performance. As I mentioned, the underlying need being that of safety and belonging. They go hand in hand, In order to feel safe, we feel we need to belong to a particular group, because if we are excluded, then we can't survive alone. So that's the underlying, unconscious needs, which then translates into all these different dynamics in our world and these different experiences. So, and I'm sure you can think of so many different ways in which we have succumbed to or given into performance in our lives, right? And look at your partnerships or friendships, whatever the relationships. And if you truly, truly look at yourself and the relational dynamics, you will see where you are actually being authentic, where you have that space for authenticity, if you do, and to what extent you're actually performing, right? Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it's like, yes, performance is embedded into human life. However, the problem is when we become programmed to such an extent into performance, when that it becomes a pressure, and it really disconnects us from our authentic self. Now, that's the problem, right? Because if we learn to like reject ourselves and our needs to such an extent in obedience or compliance or conformity of social standards and demands and stereotypes, then progressively we forget our own true nature, or who am I really, my own truth. Now, in a previous video, I spoke about, about our own truths and how to connect and express our truths. You're welcome to go back and watch this because I talk more in depth there about this. But this kind of like, when we learn to reject ourselves, our authentic self, and wear masks, like after some time, we really forget who we are. We become disconnected from that authentic self, right? Like, for example, like, you learn to please other people all the time, right? Regardless of however you feel, like you become such a people pleaser. Now, you don't know really what you truly need, what pleases you, your needs, because you have become all these other people you're pleasing, right? So I have met certain people when, ask you, what do you really want? They're unable to answer to that extent. They have really swallowed. And these can ultimately even end up in, result in cancers, because I have worked with such clients, they have swallowed themselves like so much, that the body, starts to react and it becomes poisonous, right? That's sheer lack of self-love and self-acceptance and self-worth, right? This is what the performance pressure, that program, does to us, especially when we give our power away to performance. And that's something that a lot of us do. And I have seen even the best of people sometimes how they give into, people pleasing. And people pleasing is definitely a form of like performance, right? Yeah, a trauma response as well, but yeah, it's performance, right? And so I was talking about certain partnerships, let's say, and when we base any relationship on anything other than the truth, if it's based on inauthenticity and performance, do you think it's going to be very sustainable or fulfilling or wholesome to either party, right? Because as they say, this might be a cliche, but the truth always wins and the truth sets us free, right? But for as long as you're in pretense, like you're pretending to yourself and you're running away from your truth just to survive or please somebody, or to save a relationship, thinking, okay, what's going to save the relationship is me pretending, in whatever shape or form. I can guarantee you it's the exact opposite that's going to happen, because the truth is so powerful, it's going to come up at some point it's going to be revealed, going to be disclosed. You cannot, step on a truth forever. It's going to build up pressure itself, just like the performance pressure, the pressure of, or rather the power of the truth is going to build up, and it's going to burst, at some point. It's going to explode. And that's what we call the tower moment, right? When the divine itself intervenes and shows you what your truth is. Right. And we don't really have to, because it's very, very painful when you, have to move through these tower moments when our egos collapse and all, when we are thrown into the abyss of the dark night of the soul and so on. Maybe necessary for our growth, but it's painful, and it's not always necessary for us to wait for that to happen. So you may ask, okay, what's the point in talking about all these, delving into all this, and is it even possible not to perform, right? Given that this is human life, right? And that we are all performing roles. So it's a necessary, but I mean, it's a pertinent question, yes. So my answer to that is, as far as I understand and have observed it in my own life, is this, right? So I ask myself the question, is this performance worth it? Right? So why do we perform in the first place? In order to be accepted and loved and belong, right? So that we can survive and be safe, And also at a superficial level, we feel successful. We can, reach success according to social convention and norms and standards, right? And we may feel even some happiness, some contentment, at least for some time, when we reach those goals according to these standards, right? But then, for how long does that happiness last? If you can be truly, honest with yourself. You can apply this to your careers, any of your goals, your partnerships, any aspect of life. When you have performed without really being your authentic self, you have just done things, even when you were not really truly enjoying it, when you knew that, okay, I'd rather do something else, but I'm doing this in order to achieve this. That's kind of how performance, the narrative of performance works, right? So even in a conversation, right, where you were not really very authentic with somebody, you may have pleased that person for a little while, but then did it really last? And how did it really end up in that particular conversation or the relationship, whatever that might be, right? And if it's a career goal or whatever, okay, you might buy the best house, car, whatever, you might have an ideal partner, all of that. But if you can truly ask yourself, your heart, are you truly happy? Am I truly happy? Right now, right here, just ask that question very authentically, genuinely from yourself. Am I really happy? You can even think about the entire life or an aspect of your life, particular relationship where you're performing, right? But here's the trick, sometimes we have adapted to that performance and the performing self, if I may call it that, as opposed to the authentic self, I'll call it the performance self, to such an extent that you can't differentiate, you can't disidentify, because you're so identified with it, because you have been practicing it, doing it, repeating it day in and day out, right? So the mind might immediately say, yeah, I'm happy, right? So this work takes some time. And, I'm just thinking of all the clients I'm working with currently and, the problems and how much they're suffering and the true kind of I would say the grief of the authentic self that comes up comes out during the sessions because they have been suppressed to various different reasons. So there's a lot of grief there, right? And also the joy and the delight that they experience when they finally connect very slowly, but they do connect with their soul, the soul aspect, the genuine, authentic aspect of their self. You know, I mean, it's an experience in itself, right? That's why I really love my work. But anyway, to come back to, the performative self, right, cannot really give you sustainable joy. I mean, that's a fact, right? And when you start doing the inner work and start, discovering these different parts of yourself, then only you will start really recognizing, that there is a difference between the, performative self and the authentic self that, that you have been performing all this time, and how subtle this performance can also be. I mean, it takes a long journey to realize all these things. But my point being that my realization, at least an observation, has been that true joy and happiness, wisdom, love, connections, all these things come through the authentic self when you connect with your authenticity. Because it's the authentic self that is carrying your soul, not the ego. The performance, the performative self is a construct of the ego that is driven always by fear. Right? Why do we perform in the first place? Because of the fear of rejection, right? So there you go, right? But when it comes to the authentic, true self, it doesn't have any fear. It's based on love. The soul is love, right? And it doesn't care what anybody else thinks or, what their opinion or perception of you is, because it's so content being itself. It loves itself. Self-love comes from the soul, the authentic self, right? And therefore, the joy that you experience is much more sustainable, So although you might feel that you have achieved a level of success in a relationships, career, wealth, or whatever it may be, through performance, it's not going to be long lasting. At some point, if you are really true to yourself, you're going to feel that void, and that's why it's never enough. You don't ever feel enough, no matter what. You feel, okay, you reach one goal, then, okay, you want to achieve something more and more and more. It's like this bottomless pit, right? No matter how much you try to fill it, it's never going to be filled, because the ego mind will never allow you to be fulfilled, to be enough. It's just going to create more of lack, right? Whereas the authentic self based on the soul is already full and wholesome, right? And it's never going to feel you any lack. It's born full and whole, right? Which is why it's so important for us to shift from the ego to the soul, here to love and performance, to authenticity, or the performative self to the authentic self, right? So if you want like genuine happiness, in life and peace, all these beautiful things, then I would say it's really important for you to let go of performance and start connecting to your authentic self, right? Because we lose a lot of things when we keep pursuing things in order to perform, right? And it's a lot of stress. As all of us already know, the performance, the need to perform always creates stress and pressure, not pleasure. Whereas when you're your authentic self, you just have to be. You don't have to strive to be anything else, because this is who you genuinely, truly are. Now, here's a caveat or a disclaimer when it comes to authenticity, because a lot of people get this a little bit confused. I spoke about this in that other video about connecting with the truth, right? So authenticity is not about just doing and saying anything you like, at the detriment of, your relationships or how other people are feeling, um, it's not that, speak without filters. Um, no, it's not about going into any extreme. And this channel is not about extremes, it's about coming into balance and harmony and wholeness, right? Um, so, when you are connected with your authentic self, you cannot actually hurt anybody else. You become a very loving and compassionate being. Why is that? And this is the easiest way to know whether you're connected to your authentic self or not. I would say it's a good indicator, because all our authentic selves, true selves, I would say, are very similar, if not the same, because we originate from source, and source is love, right? And at the core of each and every one of us are those beautiful attributes of the divine, which is unconditional love and compassion and wisdom and peace, and joy. And these are the main qualities, right? Of course, I'm not saying that, in this particular consciousness, um, as humans, we will always be, 100% connected to all those things. That's not what I'm saying. But the authentic self contains all these beautiful attributes, and the more like we connect to it progressively, right? So the more we connect to that part of ourselves and allow that part of ourselves to bloom and blossom and create space for its expression, its being, right? It's more of those qualities and attributes that find expression. So it makes sense, doesn't it? So the more connected you are to your authentic self, the more loving and compassionate you're going to be. So you are not going to be even able to hurt another person, you're going to be very mindful with your words and actions. So you will know that you are that authentic self when you behave that way. But if you are going around, just, expressing yourself, including your anger and whatever other emotions, and think that you are being authentic, my friend, trust me, that's not authenticity. That's just trauma expressing itself. And no judgment here. Once again, we, are all guilty of doing that, right? Of course, it's important to identify and allow and express and release all these different emotions that surface as humans from time to time. That is, those are, of course, authentic parts of ourselves also. I'm not denying that. But what I mean here, what I'm referring to as our authentic self, is our true nature, that is connected to the soul or the divine, right? And that part of us does not require any performance. That's the whole point that I wanted to drive across. It does not seek validation and approval. So it does not need to perform. It can just be. And when I'm in my authentic self, now I'm not saying this is an easy journey also, because we have to have a lot of courage and strength, which of course we can build over time, in order to resist the urge to comply and conform into that performative role, because the entire world would try to pull us back, because nobody, okay, a system that is thriving or benefiting from us losing our power is not going to be very pleased or allowing of our reclaiming our power. So when we connect to our authentic self, we are going to reclaim that power because we are not going to be any longer influenced by all uh, the pressures, the social conventions and so on, which does not really agree with our authentic self of our truth, right? So it's constantly going to pull you back, and your ego is also going to try and pull you back because the ego also does not want to die, right? It doesn't really like the idea of our liberation. Okay, so therefore you will have to learn to resist those urges and stream and swim upstreams, so to speak. And it can sometimes be a very lonely journey. You might not have many friends. You might even lose a lot of friends along the way. But that's really fine, because not everybody has the courage to do this work. But trust me, my dear friends, like you're never going to regret it because you're going to feel so powerful within. And this is what I mean by true sovereignty, right? So when you step into your sovereignty, in order to step into your sovereignty, you have to let go of the performance because the sovereign person never performs. Sovereignty is about being your own person, you know. I'm not saying that this authentic self is only light. It's both light and shadow because they always go together, right? But it is that recognition of who you truly are and what your light and shadows are. And it is actually, as I said, about being conscious. It's not about that you will never perform, but it's about at least we can start by becoming conscious of when we are performing and giving into performance. I think that would be the first step, right, on this path to really shifting into authentic self and our souls and living a more conscious and soul-led, heart-led life, which is much more joyful and fulfilling, right? Which is, true success, and I'm sure which is what we all want to ultimately experience. Okay, so my invitation to you today is to be mindful and be conscious as you are engaging in different relationships and situations, to be conscious of whether you are performing, whatever the response is coming through the performative self, or whether it's your authentic self, right? So that's a good place to start. And of course, we can keep conversing about it. But I hope what I, brought in for the discussion today would be helpful in your journeys of healing and transformation and consciousness expansion, as I always say. So do reflect a little bit on it and always share, what you feel and what you discovered about yourselves. I always love to hear from you, right? And please do subscribe and share and like if you feel that this helped you in some way, shape, or form. And till we meet next, my wish for you is, beautiful souls, may you always receive the power to be your most authentic self and step in to your sovereign self. True, authentic, sovereign self. Okay, till we meet next. Bye for now.